Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of a bus. If you've been living under the rock, wait, let me try that again. If you've been living under the rock, you're probably quite familiar with rapid transit. Usually, a bus is somewhat slow, unreliable, and requires some amount of intentional research and planning before you can make use of one. Rapid transit service, however, is typically provided by trains, especially ones that are buried underground or elevated from the street, and are frequent and convenient enough to accommodate impromptu, unplanned trips. But what if we could make a bus line that's so good that the bus essentially becomes a rapid transit service? That's what planners have been trying to do recently all around the world to varying levels of success by implementing bus rapid transit in their cities. I became aware of BRT about 5 years ago when Tulsa, Oklahoma began its Arrow BRT service. And about 5 months ago, I got to watch Oklahoma City launch its Rapid BRT service. But wait, at what point does a pebble become a rock? And at what point does a rock become a boulder? More relevant to the point I'm trying to make, at what point does a bus become rapid transit? There's actually a simple answer to this, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit more complicated. More importantly, are these BRT services even useful? If they are, how do we build more of them? And if not, how do we improve upon them? These questions are slightly more complicated to answer, but I'm hoping we can follow these answers in order to come to some fairly simple conclusions. Confused yet? Welcome to eryngo.urbanism. As I implied earlier, there could be a bit of a blurry line as to what counts as rapid and what just counts as, well, bus. I mean, we could call this bus a subway train because technically they both move people from place to place, but obviously there's a few differences that we're overlooking when we do that. To solve this problem, the ITDP has developed a definitive measuring stick that we can use to tell just how BRT a BRT is. Their BRT standard is a point-based system used to award a route with either a gold, silver, bronze, or basic rating based on the system's design. If you'd like to learn more about this rating system and some of the BRT minutiae that I'm not really planning to address here, there's a great RM Transit video about it that you should definitely check out after you've watched this video in its entirety. Spoiler alert, according to my estimation, neither the Arrow route in Tulsa nor the Rapid route in OKC actually technically makes the cut for even basic BRT. So wait, does that mean that they're bad? Should we be calling them something different? Should they even exist? Well, after seeing the impacts of the route in Tulsa and writing the new OKC route myself, I can safely say that these are both great services which act as a massive step in the right direction for both cities, despite their nebulous categorization. Let's start by taking a closer look at the Tulsa route.
Enter the era of Arrow, where the bus rapid transit takes center stage.
It was really trying to cast this net, trying to introduce the average Tulsan to what public transportation can be, if it's well invested, right? If it's done right, corners aren't cut, if it's given the money that it needs, what it could actually do to transform our community.
This is Chase Phillips with MetroLink Tulsa, formerly known as Tulsa Transit. MetroLink is the entity in charge of operating the Arrow BRT.
I got in Tulsa early 2016, and at that point, the BRT was planned, it wasn't designed. Funding wasn't in place yet, but kind of some of the groundwork was already there. Really, a lot of that vision actually came out of INCOG, who is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Tulsa.
The Arrow follows Peoria Avenue in Tulsa from 56th Street North to 81st Street South. It deviates somewhere in the middle to connect to downtown. The old route that used to serve this area was one of the busiest in the system, and the corridor was found to have the highest concentration of low or no car households in the cities surrounding it. So it made a lot of sense to focus on improving this particular corridor. This service boasts level boarding, enhanced bus stops, and shiny new buses which run on compressed methane gas. The stops are also spaced approximately half a mile apart, which is further than typical bus stops, but still within reasonable walking distance of each other. Fewer stops means fewer delays, meaning you can get further faster. The route is also more frequent than most in Tulsa, running a bus about every 20 minutes. Hang on, 20 minutes? That, quite frankly, sucks. Many standard buses in other cities run on 15-minute frequencies, and real BRT systems often run on 3-minute frequencies or less. Some places even have intercity transit more frequent than the Arrow. For example, I've recently discovered that a train runs between Edinburgh and Glasgow basically every 5 minutes. For those of you who live in Tulsa, that's a similar distance as Tulsa to Stillwater. Anyways, this lack of frequency starts to hint at some of the flaws inherent to buses that simply can't be overcome.
When it first launched, it was every 15 minutes. Right now, as we're dealing with budget shortfalls and stuff, it's only operating every 20 minutes, which is not even an express route, a high frequency bus route in a lot of other cities. We recognize that, but it is a unique service for Tulsa.
With buses, you have to pay for things like fuel, tire replacements, and most importantly and expensively, drivers.
Prior to the pandemic, operational budgets was our limiting factor. How much of a service can we afford to run? And that's largely changed now. Staffing, drivers specifically. I think every logistics agency in the country seems to be really doubling down on benefits and everything else that they can do to attract new drivers, and so retention is a major challenge. And then also even just supply chains within parts. Just a new dynamic that we're kind of learning to operate within.
If only there was another type of transit that would have lower staffing requirements, higher overall capacity, more durable components, some kind of physical guide to prevent collisions, or maybe a metal wire that's constantly touching the vehicle that could transfer electricity. In the future, a second Aero BRT route will begin downtown and extend east, following the historic Route 66 corridor on 11th Street. It will then jog 1 mile south and finish its eastward journey to the Eastgate Metroplex on 21st Street. This route was supposed to be operational already.
That project is planned and mostly designed. The project isn't funded. Spoiler alert. So we're still, quite a bit short. We don't have the money to build the stations, so we're pursuing competitive grants for it right now. Once we get money for it, that'll really kick off a little more vetted public engagement.
Let me be clear. I do think the Aero is a good service. The reason I'm being somewhat harsh is because I know how much better it could be if we made it a priority. The city of Tulsa could start building the new Route 66 Aero route tomorrow. We could even build a fully automated light metro system if we genuinely started working towards that goal. What's most frustrating to me is that we've simply decided that we don't want to pay for public transit to the extent that even a 15-minute frequency bus service had to be reduced. Now, over in Oklahoma City, the new Rapid Northwest BRT has just recently begun operations.
A faster, reliable way to travel.
It looks something like this.
New Rapid Transit Northwest OKC. Go farther, faster, new experiences, accessibility, and free Wi-Fi. Learn more and find your stop at rapidbrt.com.
Its route begins about a block from the Amtrak station and winds its way through downtown, stopping at the Midtown bus station before heading north on Classen. It turns left and extends all the way out to Lake Hefner via the Northwest Expressway. This service, as you might have guessed, boasts level boarding, enhanced bus stops, and shiny new buses which run on compressed methane gas. However, these stops are placed even further apart than Tulsa's, averaging about 3/4 of a mile between stops. This service has been even more frequent than the Aero was intended to be, actually running a bus about every 12 minutes. Additionally, tickets cannot be purchased on board the Rapid bus, meaning you must purchase them at kiosks at the stop or use an app. This saves a significant amount of time at each stop, since you only have to quickly show the driver your ticket as you board. Interestingly, this service actually also has signal priority at a few intersections, allowing the bus to bypass much of the traffic on Northwest Expressway. And finally, you'd barely notice, but we do in fact technically have dedicated bus lanes. Are they enforced? No. But did they paint the word bus on the pavement occasionally? Yes, they did do that. Technically, cars are only supposed to drive in these lanes if they're planning on turning right. But come on, you and I both know that people are just gonna drive like normal in these lanes. Despite the lack of bus lane markings and enforcement, the service seems to be generally really efficient. My girlfriend Katie and I took it to go to a particular fine dining establishment that happens to follow along its route, and the experience was quite good. OKC currently has 2 additional rapid routes in the works as a part of its Maps 4 capital improvements projects. These both begin from a similar location near the Amtrak station and extend northeast and southwest respectively. Additionally, the Oklahoma RTA is working on planning a few regional transit routes that could potentially end up as either light rail or BRT. And now it's time for the duel of the century. Aero versus Rapid. The rules are simple. Just score as high as possible on the ITDP official BRT standard scorecard. Ready? Fight! The arrow scores points for level boarding, the future planned Route 66 connection, reduced emissions, stop spacing, branding, passenger information, physical accessibility, integration with the larger MetroLink bus system, and considerations for safety and security. I also really tried to beef up the score as much as I could by assuming that the business model meets the criteria laid out in the standard, and by providing a point for the Riverside bike path being roughly parallel to the route. However, the arrow loses points when it comes to sidewalk disrepair, a lack of right-of-way enforcement, a low frequency, and for allowing bikes to share the road with the buses. All in all, the arrow scores about a 12, which is well below the score of 20 that the service needs to be considered basic BRT.
We like to call it BRT Lite. There are a lot of bells and whistles that are unique to BRT. And our BRT service does have several of those. Transit signal priority, it has that, but it doesn't have the obvious one. Our BRT operates in traffic. Same travel lanes as the rest of the college. That's a box we're just not checking. But yeah, we call it a BRT Lite internally for sure, so we recognize it.
How about OKC's Rapid? Well, it scores very similarly. However, we'll go ahead and give it the points for dedicated right-of-way, however nebulous that might be. It also scores for off-board payment and 30 to 70% signal priority. It won't get points for a parallel bike route, and the distance between stops is actually longer than what's allowable for points. But the 12-minute frequency really helps a lot with the deductions. In the end, the Rapid scores somewhere right around 28 points, which means it actually does qualify as basic BRT. Well, almost. There's a few more specific requirements that must be met for basic BRT. Notably, there's a requirement for alignment. In order to meet this requirement, the route must be configured in one of these specific ways. The standard seems to prefer center running, as it allows for stops in both directions to be served from a single station. And it actually does make a lot of sense when you start to think about it. Currently, in both OKC and Tulsa, moving from a northbound stop to a southbound stop means crossing a dangerous strode. And it often means crossing two different stroads in two different directions. We can all agree that this sucks, but no amount of improvements to the stops, to the buses, or to the schedules will fix this. Fixing this crossing problem would require a fundamental change to the design of the stroads themselves to allow the bus to be placed in a more accessible and user-friendly location. So obviously these routes have a lot of room for improvement. We shouldn't pretend these services are the best that they possibly can be, because that just simply isn't true. But at the same time, there is tremendous value in building these BRT Lite systems in historically transit-starved cities. I mean, the numbers don't lie.
Our BRT is doing very well. In terms of like numbers, these may not mean a lot, but I'll put them in context. So it's doing about 50,000 trips a month. The route that existed that predated the BRT was our heaviest ridership route in the system by far. That route did around 34,000 trips a month. So right off the bat, the BRT is kind of already doubling the ridership, or at least up by 60% from what it was. With that said, it also has more buses on it. So when you look at efficiency and everything, it's not obviously double, but it's still a very, very productive bus route. Overall, it's about a third of our total ridership each month. So system-wide, the BRT, that one route is carrying a third of all of our riders. So our ridership is coming back, kind of coming out of the pandemic, but the BRT is far outpacing what the rest of the system is doing.
If anyone ever tells you that public transit doesn't work in sprawling cities, they're lying to you. It does work.
There's this mindset that any cities that are in middle America, where we've kind of developed in a very automobile-centric environment, there's a lot of people that just don't believe that public transportation can be successful. I think our BRT stood in contrast to a lot of those beliefs, but even a lot of Canadian cities experienced the same type of development pattern, and yet, you know, after the 50s and 60s, a lot of them kind of changed course, started reinvesting into public transportation. Obviously, they're successful. This was what the BRT was intended to be, changing what Tulsans think of public transportation.
The problem isn't the mode of transit, it's the quality of service.
The average Tulsan who isn't using their bus system, they weren't asking for more frequent service because it's just not in their frame of reference, which is really unfortunate. Our riders certainly wanted more frequent service, and they were incredibly ecstatic to get, and deserving so.
People want transportation that gets them where they want to be, when they want to be there. People want to wait as little as possible, and as comfortably as possible. Attempting to use a traditional, infrequent bus service can be almost dehumanizing, and most of all, people want transportation that will treat them with dignity and respect. That means respect for people's time, safety, comfort, and well-being. And I genuinely think that both the Aero and Rapid buses actually do provide all of these things.
It is having a very big impact on our riders and how they might change their travel patterns and change what bus routes they connect to. They'll still opt to go to the BRT because of the frequency that it provides.
In the future, hopefully we can continue improving these corridors, either to bring them up to actual BRT standards, or even better, to replace them with automated light metro lines. Ultimately, I think that our cities, even out here in Oklahoma, should be designed around many different transit options, which can form an interrelated network. In fact, the interface between the Rapid BRT and the Oklahoma City streetcar can start to give us a look at what this intermodal future could look like. I personally think that the OKC streetcar is pretty great, but if you're not convinced, you should definitely give this video a watch. Thank you to all of our patrons who continue to provide support for videos like these. You all rock. If you'd like to support the channel but don't have a few monthly dollars to spare, consider subscribing. It's totally free and helps show YouTube that people are interested. I really appreciate it.